Good morning, everybody. Shall we get started? Great. So my name is Michael Olson. I'm part of the product marketing team at Puppet. I want to welcome you all here. This is something that we started last year, this dedicated set of sessions we call the IT Leader Track. So second consecutive year that we've pulled together folks like you in IT leadership roles, as well as our esteemed group of speakers that you'll have a chance to meet over the course of the day, really to cover topics like emerging trends in IT, digital transformation. You'll hear some real-world case studies of how organizations like yourselves are implementing DevOps practices. We'll talk about topics like security and compliance, as well as how organizations are adopting next-generation technology and modernizing their data centers. So we're kicking things off with a Q&A discussion with Peter Richards, who you'll have a chance to meet more formally, former financial services CTO. It'll be moderated by Gia Lyons, our Director of Product Marketing here at Puppet. And without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce them onto the stage. Thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. Real quick, I'm Gia Lyons. I am super excited to join the Puppet family. I've been in enterprise software for almost 20 years. Started out as a developer before SOA was like a sparkle in anyone's eye, so I don't consider myself a developer anymore. Through technical evangelist at IBM, strategic consultant, and now I get to be part of this Puppet community. So super excited to be here. And I'd like to turn over to Peter Richards a little bit to introduce yourself a little bit more so they understand who they're talking to.
Okay, so I'm Peter Richards. I spent the last 25 years in financial services IT. I actually started out as a developer, but fairly soon moved over to managing infrastructure. I was CTO at Goldman Sachs, Bear Stearns. It's a little investment bank you might have heard about. We then took over this other bank called JP Morgan. So I became the CTO for the markets business there, and I was the CTO for the markets business at Bank of America. During that period, I was also involved in engineering the platform. So not only was I doing sort of talking to developers and users, but I spent a lot of time thinking about how the underpinnings of technology should work. And I'm now fantastically retired, so I can enjoy good weather like this and sort of come to events and chat to people. So that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. So before we get started, I'd like to see, by show of hands, how many of you have CIOs or CTOs or other IT executives who support your automation efforts or your DevOps practices and approaches? Oh, that's fantastic. And how many of you are working on advancing those practices and tools and processes throughout the rest of your organization? Well, you're in the right room. Okay, good. We will actually.
There's nothing to talk about.
Yeah, we're done.
Right,
no. We'll actually try to save some time for Q&A without running into the lunchtime. So Peter, you know, we keep hearing about digital transformation. As we heard from Sanjay this morning, it's kind of I kind of shut off when I hear it too. I've been listening to it for 2-3 years. Why is it a top driver today?
So there's a couple of things that I think mean that we're in this fairly transformational time. So the first thing is that everyday life now includes technology, right? There are no things that you do which don't have a technology aspect to it, and that's true for everyone. The other day, the New York Times led an article with the statement, there isn't a company that isn't a technology company. Well, there isn't a company that shouldn't be a technology company. But more importantly, we're now accepting technology as part of our lives. So 25 years ago, when I joined financial services, technology was something that every bank had because every other bank had, not because it was necessary for the process of whatever they did, whether it was in institutional banking or in consumer banking. Today, there is nothing that can happen in financial services without technology. That's now spread across all of the companies you interact with. I was actually talking to a company that's a body repair company, an auto body repair company. Right? What technology would they need other than, tell me, right? They actually have some great applications to do job scheduling, to communicate with their customers. with this particular group, you can now actually see what the process is going on your car. So you know what's going on, and you can check out all of the details that they're going through. So instead of hoping that they did a good job, you can actually track that. And they see this as a great selling point, and it's pure technology. So technology is invading every part of our lives. And the fact that we have this thing called digital transformation, I believe, is actually driven to a great extent by the cloud, which is another one of those buzz phrases, and everybody's going to turn around and go, right? But in all honesty, given the length of time I've been playing around in technology, I think there are three very significant things that have happened. So the first one happened many years ago. Most of you probably weren't around to see it, which is the introduction of the PC. So it used to be we had these big computers. You might remember it, but all right. I didn't mean it, right? But you had these big computers. Now we could get things on people's desks, and that changed an awful lot of things. It introduced technology more. We didn't really know why, but it did. The second one happened probably about 20 years ago with the introduction of the internet, because that opened up applications to more people. And I think the one that's currently happening is the migration away from owning your own environment, right? Physical environment. Virtualization didn't do it. That was just a way of maximizing what you were doing. But the fact that now it's kind of over there and you're not sure where it is, it means you have to focus in on the application, right? Rather than, we got this really great server, and the server is fabulous, but we're not quite sure what the application is that's running on it, because that's less important than this server. We've taken that away, right? So now you're focused on what is the application. And to me, that's what digital transformation is. It means that all of us, so everybody in this room, should be thinking about what the function is that the technology is providing for the business, rather than whether you've got 5 machines or 500 machines or 5,000 machines.
I love that. And you said something earlier, everybody's becoming a software company. I just read something GM published about a week ago asking Silicon Valley to move to Detroit. I'm sure that's going to happen. But
you're gonna dig
things
a
like
big
the
valley.
Swarovski crystal company is disrupting themselves before somebody else disrupts them. GE has this whole employee ambassador campaign to attract people like you to come work at that little startup we call GE. So it sounds like you're saying that the application is the thing that drives the business, and you need to think that way versus the application for the application's sake. And so what's making CIOs recognize that this is a key priority? Is it about serving the customer experience faster and better? Is it about creating market growth opportunities, or is it simply just responding to competitive pressures?
Well, what I think is because now technology is so important to businesses that CIOs have to think about businesses. CIOs used to be the guys that did technology when the business told them they needed something. Now CIOs should actually be at the forefront of business development. You have to understand what's going on. You know, I'm going to go back to financial services again. Everybody's used an ATM. You probably use online banking. You might even deposit things through, your cell phones. All of that came about, frankly, because of technologists, right? So the business didn't come in one day, consumer banking head didn't come and say, I think we should do something with, making ATMs more sophisticated. Maybe, you can do this, that, and the other. The technologists actually looked at what was possible and said, we can do more with what's there. And we can make it into something which is really useful for our customers. And it wasn't necessarily the person who was developing stuff in the consumer bank, right? It might have been some guy who was, really interested in image processing and could see how that affected the business process.
Like citizen development almost.
Well, it's getting away from the layering of roles, right? It used to be that SAs and developers really didn't talk to each other because they clearly knew each other were not very smart or something. I don't know. It's like, you had this belief that the infrastructure was, if you happened to be an SA, was the most important and complex thing, and if you were a developer, the application was the most important and complex thing, and you're both wrong. right? Because the only thing that matters is functionally, how does technology help the business? And so if the breakage of the infrastructure is going to cause the technology not to help the business, that's a problem. If the application isn't capable of dealing with the things that the business need, that's a problem. It only works if it all comes together. So one of the things which is great about this and why I've taken time out of my retirement to come and sort of be here, other than the sun and the food, is because I think what Puppet does is it allows you to encapsulate the whole of the application. And so you sort of strip away some of that layering.
I love that. So as we're forming how we speak to our CIOs and the people who report to him or her, we need to start using business language to encapsulate, if you will, what it is we're trying to accomplish with our automation and DevOps movement across the organization. So,
well, just for a second, right? So, right, presumably that's what you guys do, right? You don't go to somebody and say, hey, this is fantastic. It's a really cool piece of technology. We should spend money on it, right? Because if you walk up to your CIO, they're going to say, well, what does it do for me? And you have to already be thinking about that, right? And actually, it's what does it do for the company? Because having the coolest piece of technology, which provides no business benefit, is not terribly helpful. Everybody has to think about business. One of the things I used to do with my crew is I'd wander around and see people, and I'd ask them, what did you do today that helped the business? And some of the people looked at me like I was a complete idiot. Oh, I'm a DBA. What do you mean, what did I do? Right? Well, do you know what the importance is of the data elements that you're playing with? And if the answer was no, I told them to go and find out. Because otherwise, how could you do triage properly? How can you even contribute to evolution and development? Because you can't. You can tell me that this database is better than that database, but from what perspective? It has to be business related.
I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball. For those of you in the organization here.
You're going to have to explain, because I'm clearly not from the States.
Oh,
right?
How do you say it?
What's a curveball? a googly.
I'll throw you a wicked googly. So for those of us in the organization who perhaps don't have progressive CIOs, perhaps they're more risk-averse, reactionary, very much into control and command and compliance. Nobody has any of that, right?
See, I told you we don't need this.
They probably have a bigger boulder to push up the hill than folks who get to work for people like you. What are your comments?
You're always going to run into people, right? So it's not necessarily the CIO. It might be a senior manager or whatever, right? Everybody has to buy into things. And one of the ways that you can approach this, right? So everybody has to, in parallel, think about 3 time frames, right? So if there's a fire going on, you should be putting it out, right? There is no question about that. It's really dopey doing architectural design when the building is burning, right? So you have to do firefighting. Now you want to minimize that, and you don't want to do only firefighting, but you certainly have to pay attention to that. Second thing you've got to do is pay attention to delivery, right? There has to be a track record of delivery, and when we talk about DevOps, the delivery can come quite rapidly, but you have to have that delivery going on. But all this is of no avail if you don't have a direction you're going in. You have to have a vision, and you have to have the ability to explain that vision, right? What is the direction of our efforts? And when you start talking to senior managers, CIOs, business people about where are you going to go, now you've captured them. Because they either disagree or they agree. If they disagree, there's a great debate to be had, which is about, well, that's great, you disagree with what I think we're doing. What are we doing? And that question has to be answered. Because if the answer is, I don't really know, just get on with your work, you have the foundation for a really good debate and discussion across a broader set of people, which then forces folk into understanding this. And one of the situations I've seen many times is people are either consumed by firefighting, so haven't got time or energy to do anything else, or they have the delivery and they're very, very focused on that, and they leave this sort of vision piece out. My view is if you really don't know where you're going, how do you know that the steps you're taking are going to get you there? There's probably some confusion in that statement, but the point is, unless you know your direction, right, the whole team is going to go off in different ways. And that's how you bring CIOs into the fold, because they love that kind of stuff. And it allows them then to have more of a dialogue with the senior people at the firm.
And I love that you brought that up. It allows them to have dialogue with other senior executives across the organization. And one of the things that other executives outside IT organizations particularly care about are customers. So when you say help the business, another way to think about that is serving customer expectations, because customer acquisition costs, customer retention costs are top of mind, as well as other parts of the business. So going back to that, we've all seen situations where software is great today and it sucks tomorrow. And so how can IT evolve their practices and processes and habits to keep an ear toward what customers need and what they expect and their behaviors, and still ensure that they deliver and operate that software that meets those expectations?
So I think there's 2 or 3 different questions in that question.
Yeah, you could take the first part last.
But I'm actually going to start with something which for a long time has been a bit of a hobby horse for me. We frequently talk about internal customers, and I think that's just wrong, right? So customers truly are customers of the firm you're working in. You may have internal partners, you may be part of a team that consists of many different disciplines, that's great, but you don't have internal customers, right? Because you have this terrible phrase, the customer's always right, and if they're internal, and it takes your attention away from what is the true customer, right? Who is the true customer of your firm? If you can't answer that, then you're going to have great difficulty in understanding what they need. One of the things that is a very underused tool in technology, right? By the way, we're all in general introverts. I have taken a number of these various tests where you answer 100 questions which you have no idea why, and it proves that I'm a great introvert. And so this is clearly a very uncomfortable situation for me. But part of the problem with that is we actually don't use the simple question why. Right? We should go and talk to business people. It doesn't matter that you're an SA or you're a DBA or you whatever, you're an operations guy. You can go and talk to the business and say, hey, what's your view of the world? How do you think about our customers? And it turns out that they love talking about our business. And so you can go and have those conversations and start understanding more, and then you get dialogue going. And now you can bring your experiences to the business guy and say, hey, well, how about if we did this? Right? So long time ago, I worked with this fantastic guy who ran what was a thing called the Japanese equity warrants desk. And it's the source of enormously amusing stories. But the first thing that I did, I picked up the ownership of the development of all technology for this desk. And they actually made a great deal of money, which was fabulous. So went to see Peter, useful name, and said, what is it that you would like if you were completely unconstrained? And he told me. He said, but clearly you'll never be able to do that. Well, 4 weeks later, he had that. And it was really quite trivial, because he'd never had the discussion about what his business was with the technology people. And the technology guys had all of these things they could bring to the table, but because the guy who ran the desk had no true understanding of technology, he didn't know what to ask for. So we had to work together, and we built a system. It happened to be a trading system in Excel, that doesn't matter, but it made an enormously profitable business work really, really well. And that lasted for several years. But it was truly just the set of conversations. Because if you sit back and say, no, you bring me your requirements, you're relying on people to know your world better than you do. And frankly, nobody knows your world better than you do. So you have to contribute to how do we apply that to the business. There was another part of the question. I can't remember what it was.
Me either.
Okay.
No.
Clearly was the heart of it.
First of all, I love your take on you have to think of the end customer as the true end customer to your business, not to what you deliver internally necessarily. You're just continuing that out to the customer, and that's a great way to start thinking about it. And I'm just going to reiterate this a little bit. As you're creating your case for your CIO to buy into this and take to the rest of the executive C-suite across your organization, I love that. Go out and get the business perspective from your business partners inside your organization to help put the storyline around why DevOps is so critical in your organization. But back to what we were talking about is how do we keep that ear toward the customer, which I think you answered, and ensure that we deliver and operate software that meets those expectations.
Right. I think this is where, right? So 70, 80, 90% of all IT budgets is focused on maintenance, right? Old applications, keeping things running, vintage, right? And part of the challenge we have is persuading folk that we really need to update the old stuff rather than just focus on the new. By looking at applications and application environments and encoding them, you have a much more straightforward way of doing that update. Right? So part of the big problem that you have, right? Most distributed applications, the average age of distributed applications is now between 15 and 20 years, right? Which I find to be quite a shocking fact. But it means that most of the stuff you're dealing with, and Luke just made this example of a company that's reliant on Sonos, right? How do you get away from that? How do you actually bring things into this century, right? And you do that by taking things like Puppet and doing the encoding and making infrastructure as software, and then applying that and adding that to the application. If you do that, now you're reducing the amount of maintenance burden you have, but you're also bringing things forward, so you're no longer reliant on these old versions of software.
That end state is portable now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And look, it's hard, right? There's no question. But it's something we have to do. If you don't, you're just going to get sunk by all of the vintage software.
Yeah, right. So we all know that we need to go to our CIOs and get them on board. But you mentioned, his or her budget, 80% is KTLO. So that other 20%, we used to talk about that as innovation or doing the new stuff.
Yeah.
But now we've got chief digital officers, and then there's the chief marketing officer and the chief whatever officer. Everybody has digital transformation in their business objectives. So, who's running the ship here? Who's in charge?
So one of the things you discover, and I'm sure some of you have this experience, the more senior you get, the less ability you have to direct things, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? So you're running an organization of many thousand people, and you suddenly realize that you're reliant on the people. So as you get more senior, there's, CIOs, any C-suite, it really is about telling the story and allowing everybody to see the vision and then join in, right? There's one of the CIOs I worked for had this great phrase, which is none of us is as smart as all of us. And once you sort of pick that apart, it just means that if you actually bring the team with you, you'll get there faster. And so it's all of our responsibilities, and you have to explain and allow and encourage everybody to feel that they're part of the process of getting there. Because the worst thing that happens, and again, you may well recognize this, it's always they won't let me do it, right? And you try and track down who the hell they are. and they don't exist. Right? What's happened is there's this perception that there are these omnipresent senior management types who take decisions and issue direction, and you have to wait for them to make the right decision. Well, that's not true. Right? It's more about how do we get everybody together pulling on the same piece of rope. And you do that by explaining where we're going. And you don't have to be the most senior person in the room to explain where we're going. Right? Everybody can contribute. And so if you are a manager or you're a senior manager, you have to create an environment where everybody feels they can contribute. And then the "they won't let me do it" goes to, we haven't worked out what we need to do to get there yet, but let's work on that problem. And to me, that's the issue. Right? So there really isn't, and I can tell you, I've sat in, CIO councils and this, that, and the other, and we don't sit around and go, hey, this is great, we'll do this next, right? Because how do we know, right? The answer is you don't. You have to work with all of the teams, and it's actually surprisingly from all over the place that the great ideas come. And what you have to do is create an environment where the ideas can grow. And you weed some of them out, and that's great. But you actually take the ones which are smart and which make a difference and help the business, and then you put the energy behind that. And so it really is about everybody coming together. It's a team sport.
Aside on that, a lot of CIOs are very networked with their peers in other organizations and often listen to
Yep.
the experiences of their peers. And so to that point, how important is this DevOps movement across CIOs? 20%, if my CIO is going, not my CIO, but your CIO is going to be out there talking with their peers.
He was just talking about DevOps, actually.
Believe it or not. Yeah, he's kind of cool. As a CIO, they're out there talking to the peers. What's the likelihood that DevOps is going to come up in conversation right now?
Oh, 100%.
100%?
Yeah.
That's a good thing. So they're getting that I don't want to say pressure, but awareness from.
But actually, it's a great example,
Yeah.
right? So the CIOs didn't go out and say, hey, let's do DevOps, right? It actually came from people who wanted to make a change, right? So AWS, right? I guarantee you that all of the first uses of AWS at any of your companies were some guy with a credit card deciding he'd sort of just see what it was like.
It's these
right?
people probably did.
And probably you guys, right? And now if you go and you talk to a bunch of CIOs, they're actually talking about how do we get to the cloud, right? DevOps is involved in that conversation. And so some of the CIOs are like, I don't know what this DevOps is, but they'll go and find out, and they'll talk to folk, and they'll have that conversation. And so it's absolutely there.
Excellent. So we've got a few minutes left, and I'd like to give the community some time to ask you some questions. So we've heard from you, we need to build a case. We need to tie it to technology. How is technology affecting the business in a positive way? Bring in the customer perspective. Develop a story that everybody can talk about and has a role for not only the CIO, but other C-level executives, because oftentimes they're probably not in the loop. They don't know what DevOps is. They don't understand how it's going to drive digital transformation.
Can I just modify one second?
Yes.
Right? You don't have to explain what DevOps is, right? What you don't want to do is to get everybody in the C-suite to have to understand technology, right? That's the wrong way of approaching it. You actually have to get them to understand that you bring a skill to the table which will allow them to do a different business transaction, that will help their business, that will become efficient. Because the mistake we made 10, 15, 20 years ago was trying to get everybody to actually understand technology, and getting people who had no understanding to take decisions which would then drive us insane because they took the wrong decision. But how could they not take the right? It just made no sense. They know about business, they know about customers, they know where they want to go. We translate that. That's what our responsibility is.
What are some other do's and don'ts?
don't believe that nobody's listening to you, right? You won't immediately convince people, right? You'll have good, interesting debate. Do enter into the debate. Do have open minds, right? None of us is right all the time. Even me. Actually, I'm rarely right, but it's great having people, right? Challenge, right? Debate is one of the greatest things in technology, even though we think that it's all just about technology. It's not. It's really about philosophy and thinking. And don't limit yourself, right? If you can't understand what your business is, you've got to fix that immediately, right? I again, would wander around and I'd sort of pick people and say, hey, tell me what a derivative is. And they're like, what the hell's a derivative? I have no idea. Well, you're building a system for them, so, right? And to me, that's really, really important, right? So do understand your business. You guys have a better chance of understanding your business than your business has of understanding what you do. And just think about it that way, right? And actually, the business is really interesting, right? Because it's why you're working at companies. It really is.
Love it. We've got a few minutes. What questions do you have for Peter? Yes?
So I think hybrid public cloud would be the next movement. I hear you, you kind of agree with that, or you maybe, try to promote that. So the question here is, your working the financial security is a big thing. If we apply better security, do you think the bank would go along with it?
So the question, if I can repeat just for the recording, is the cloud is kind of the next thing. And how is it that financial systems can afford to use the cloud? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So about probably 2 or 3 years ago, all of the technologies that were necessary to enable the technology people at banks to get comfortable with the cloud were in place. The problem was that the general public, who, for reasons which we can spend long hours going into, didn't really like banks very much. And so we're always looking for reasons why they should write, bad press about them. And it was only 12 to 18 months ago that the use of cloud and cloud for data in our everyday lives managed to ameliorate that problem. So now it's okay for banks not to have data within their four walls, right? So it's possible to do this. Technically, it's been possible for a while. And the quality of the security, if you use things correctly, is actually very good. It's frequently better than smaller banks have in their own systems. So it actually increases the level of security, but the public wasn't ready to understand that. And the press were very happy to have a field day every time there was a hiccup, right? So it really was public pressure more than anything else. But I am now very confident, having retired, that the banks can happily use cloud. And if you look at it, the vast majority of the major financial institutions are now doing a lot of work in those areas. So,
another question?
So the financial institutions are becoming more and more comfortable with moving their data into a cloud-like environment. Is that what I heard you say?
yep.
Okay.
I mean, there's still going to be debates, and I've had those debates. But what you're actually seeing, because 4 years ago at a conference, right, I said, we don't need to use public cloud, we'll build our own, right? And the reason was because we wanted to make sure we were seen to be securing data. Now we don't need to do that, right? So, sorry, you were right.
So, for DevOps, for developers, we like to develop things. For operations, we like to fix things. So what you're saying to us is that we need to become more business-minded, enterprising business people to understand the business well for us to fix things?
So every technologist brings their skill to the table, okay? So they're really, some developers are good at developing stuff, some SAs are good at building stuff, some operators are good at running stuff. You actually need all of that to make an application work, right? There are relatively few people who just on their own make everything work, right? Especially when you get to large scale. So the role you have is not necessarily, it's not going to say whether or not you should understand the business. I think everybody has a responsibility to understand the business. So the skill that you bring can then be applied in a sensible way to help the business. And actually one of the things which has been very positive is the teams associated with an application working together, right? So if you happen to be a developer and you've added some functionality and you're releasing it, you really need to communicate that to the people who are going to be running it. Now, if they happen to be the guy in the same team, that's easy. If there's a guy who happens to be in some other continent, then you have to make sure you do a good job of saying, hey, we're doing this change, you should see this happening. And a lot of the ways that software helps you makes that communication easier. But there are multiple different roles, and there always will be. There's a bunch of different skills that are needed to bring technology to help with business function. And as long as we think about what the business is, we're going to be aligned to trying to make it better, right? So yes, you have this great set of skills. Let's bring them to the table and work with everybody else. Yeah.
Other questions?
Yes, sir.
As
I can hear you. It's okay. Keep going.
okay, so as businesses and DevOps grows, how do you fight against the inevitable productization of it that CIOs and CTOs that are like, I'm just going to go buy me some DevOps, and they don't realize it's a process, not
Send them to me. I've got something to buy.
Go buy me some DevOps.
It's all. So one of the terrible things about labeling things is that you suddenly put them in a box, right? And DevOps actually is one of those things which is great because it's almost impossible to put it in a box, right? I mean, you can go and talk to Gene, but it's about making things actually flow, bringing people together. I used to say DevOps was more about automation than anything, but I think it's more about getting teams to work. And there really isn't a box labeled DevOps, insert here and off you go. But it really is more about culture, right? Because that's, like I was saying earlier, you bring lots of skills together, and as long as everybody knows what the same, the aim is, then we'll all work together on this. And you just bring smart people together. It's fantastic. So that to me is more about DevOps. There's some things we haven't worked out, right? So if you're going to be releasing on a very frequent basis something which is as critical to 20, 30, 40 million people as the balance in their current account, you don't want to do I'll fix it as soon as it breaks, right? So there's a whole set of things which will emerge as best practices. But, I hate labels. And I just like really smart people working together.
Do we have time for one more? Okay.
Who can tell?
One of the biggest issues I'm having with DevOps is the people to C-level above seem to think that DevOps means they don't need anything in the middle, that a developer can start the cycle and go all the way through customer support with no intermediaries in the middle, and that's their future goal because they can hire talent, non-domestic, and just do the full stack. That's DevOps to them.
Good luck. Yeah, I think, again, it's more about conversation, right? So what are you trying to achieve, right? If the answer is you want to get more functionality cheaper, right? Take DevOps off the table in terms of a phrase and talk about what functionality and what's the budget target. And then you go through it and you do the triage and you say, we do these 3 things and here are the people we need to do it. And now you're not talking about DevOps anymore. You're actually talking about real, true deliverables. And the fact that you're actually delivering something every 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months, they'll kind of back into it. But you've got to, right? So it's like, where's the DevOps? You can actually build a box that says DevOps and get them to put money in it, right? But it really is more about doing the process rather than adding a label to it.
We need a descriptor to take place of the label when we're having the conversations, it sounds like, in some situations.
But, look, people's roles are going to change, right? And that's been true ever since technology emerged from wherever it came from, right? So the things which I started doing when I first fell into technology, they don't really exist anymore, right? And so all the roles change, right? The guy who is the admin for the storage subsystem, right? So their job's going to change, right? Because you move to the cloud. Luke was talking about spinning Rust. Yeah, it doesn't happen anymore, right? So yes, lots of things change, but you actually have to think about what you're trying to get to, and this is why the business is important, the function's important, and then getting all the people together to work on it. So that's how I'd approach it.
Well, Peter, we've really enjoyed spending time with you today. Good news is he's going to be on main stage for Keynote tomorrow on another panel with Sanjay and a few others, so we get to hear his
We're just
pearls
going to
of
say the
wisdom
same
again.
thing, actually.
You got a preview. No, it'll be different. So thank you very much. If you do have any further questions, Peter does walk around and does respond, I think. So I think. Let the man eat. But other than that, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you at the next session.